This is the customary time when the defendant expresses regret for the crimes they committed. So let me do that because I am not without my regrets. I am here today to be sentenced for my participation in releasing mink from 6 fur farms. I regret it was only 6. I'm also here today to be sentenced for my participation in the freeing of 8,000 mink from those farms. I regret it was only 8,000. It is my understanding of those 6 farms, only 2 of them have since shut down. I regret it was only 2. More than anything, I regret my restraint because whatever damage we did to those businesses, if those farms were left standing and if one animal was left behind, then it wasn't enough. I don't wish to validate this proceeding by begging for mercy or appealing to the conscience of the court, because I know if this system had a conscience, I would not be here, and in my place would be all the butchers, vivisectors, and fur farmers of the world. Just as I will remain unbowed before this court, who would see me imprisoned for an act of conscience, I will also deny the fur farmers in the room the pleasure of seeing me bow down before them. Those people here whose sheds I may have visited in 1997, let me tell you directly for the first time, it was a pleasure to raid your farms and to free those animals you held captive. It is to those animals I answer to, not you or this court. I will forever mark those nights on your property as the most rewarding experience of my life. And to those farmers or other savages who may read my words in the future and smile at my fate, just remember, we have put more of you in bankruptcy than you have put liberators in prison. Don't forget that. Let me thank everyone in the courtroom who came to support me today. It is my last wish before prison that each of you drive to a nearby fur farm tonight, tear down its fence, and open every cage. That's all. Those are the words of our guest today, right before he was given the maximum sentence for liberating animals. Welcome to the Animal Liberation Hour, where we seek insight from animal rights and liberation activists around the world so that we can think, reflect, learn, and be inspired. It's season 2. I'm Trey Morrow, and for this episode, I sat down with Peter Young and discussed his new book, The A.L.F. Strikes Again, as well as his other book, Liberate. I can't wait for you all to hear what he had to say. But before we get into the episode, I want to remind you that the Animal Liberation Hour is a project of Animal Activism Mentorship. AAM is a free multinational program that helps aspiring animal rights activists, as well as those who are already activists but want to take their activism to the next level. From one-on-one mentorship to free workshops and trainings to this podcast, AAM seeks to empower humans to fight for animals so that the world will have more activists and we can achieve liberation sooner. For more information, you can visit animalactivismmentorship.com and follow AAM on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Animal Activism Mentorship. You can keep up with the Animal Liberation Hour on AAM's social media too. Animal Activism Mentorship is fueled by Farm Animal Rights Movement. Peter Young is just an incredible human being. If you haven't read his book, Liberate, it is absolutely entertaining, incredible, inspiring. It is definitely a page turner, and most recently he put out a book called The A.L.F. Strikes Again. It's basically a collection of different documents from the A.L.F., from how-to manuals to interviews to media coverage. It's just a collection. It's basically a 700-page history book of the Animal Liberation Front. If you're not familiar with what the Animal Liberation Front is, we're going to be talking about that. If you haven't read the books yet, we're not going to spoil anything. I think it'll just make you want to order the books even more. So without further ado, the incredible, the inspiring Peter Young. Welcome to another episode of the Animal Liberation Hour. Our special guest today is an animal liberator, former prisoner, Animal Liberation Front historian and best friend of Nancy Grace, Mr. Peter Young. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thanks, man. I don't know if Nancy Grace would quite characterize our relationship that way, but thanks for that.
Well, your chemistry on screen I thought was undeniable, so I just figured I'd throw
She's
that
a charmer.
in there. So, Peter, you're an author. Your newest book, The A.L.F. Strikes Again, is a 700-page history book about actions carried out by the Animal Liberation Front and other liberationist groups. Can you tell us what and who the A.L.F. is and why it's important to preserve this history?
Absolutely. A lot to say about this. So the A.L.F. is a clandestine, underground, not even an organization, but just a collection of individual activists who decided to break the law to save animals. That's really fundamentally what the A.L.F. is. So A.L.F. actions can range from, breaking into a lab, like really spectacular sort of large-scale actions, like breaking into a lab and rescuing animals, all the way down to breaking the window at a McDonald's. So there's a history going back to the late 70s of activists carrying out, again, the whole spectrum of tactics to break the law to save animals when, legal means have failed those animals. So there's anyone who carries out an action that's within accordance with the A.L.F. guidelines can claim it's an A.L.F. action. So there is no centralized structure. There's no organization to it. You could get together with several trusted friends tonight or go out by yourself and become the A.L.F. So the A.L.F. the tactics are the range is very broad. The history of it, which we'll probably talk about, is very extensive. And I think it's actually been written out of the history book, so to speak, largely. Even amongst activists, people aren't really aware how rich the A.L.F.'s history is.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I read this book, I had always heard about the A.L.F. and I'd heard about actions here and there, some of the more famous ones, but I had no idea that there was so many actions that they went so far back. Before we get into more of that, tell us a little bit about just about your own story and how you got involved in helping animals and eventually in the A.L.F.
I got involved in the animal rights movement. It was actually literally, I'm trying to do the math. It was the first week. We're recording this in the first week of the year. So it was the first week of 1996. Very end of 95 was when I started kind of get involved, but I joined my first meeting in beginning of 96. And I was living in Seattle at the time, and I'd first seen a newspaper article where there was someone in my town. I lived in a town called Mercer Island, right outside Seattle. It's the suburb. It's like literally an island, but it's like in a lake, not in the ocean. And someone had went around putting, I don't know if they still make these, but the eating animals stickers below the stuff. So someone had put those all over and actually made the local paper. And this is back when being in the paper was like you were like, I mean, that was like big. Anything was on paper was like big news, right? Before the internet. So I set out to ask all over Mercer Island, because I had just become vegan, but I had no involvement in activism. I went all over asking, does anyone know who put the sticker? And they did a story. It was basically like kind of like a funny, like they were trying to just like make light of it. But these stickers have been put all over Mercer Island. And for those of you, that don't know, it's the sticker that says eating animals, and it's placed below the word stop on a stop signs, right? So I'd seen that. I went all over Mercer Island asking anyone I could, does anyone know who this other vegan is, presumably vegan, on Mercer Island, because I got to meet them. And I got a couple people that were like, yeah, it's this one guy. I won't say his name. I don't know if it matters. I'll leave him. I want to implicate him in this horrendous act of vandalism on these stop signs. But anyway, a couple people pointed me, I think it's this guy. And I was like, I went to high school with that guy. I didn't know he was vegan, but okay. So I ended up running into him like on the street one day. And I was like, dude, are you the guy who put the stickers on the stop signs? And he's really like cagey. He's like, I don't, maybe I was, maybe I wasn't. So we ended up becoming friends. He invited me to my first meeting. And this is the University of Washington. I was not a student, but there was a student group there. And so I proceeded to attend their meetings. And that's how I got involved. I'd been vegan for a whole year at that point. I'd never met another vegan. And the whole way we can go into the whole story how I became vegan. I feel like those stories tend to be kind of boring when people start talking about, but anyway, I got involved through the hardcore punk music scene, and that's basically it. So I was vegan for a year, didn't know any other vegans, met this guy, invited me to a meeting, and the climate was very different back then. So I walked into this meeting, and they were organizing, like a people were going to U-lock themselves. They were organizing basically a disruption at the Seattle Fur Exchange, like fur auction house. And so it was like, I walk in and everyone's organizing this like civil disobedience action, but then on the table to the side, there's all this A.L.F. literature. And I was like, what is this amazing world I've stepped into? Like, this is what I've been looking for. Because I was tired of being an ineffective vegan. So I picked up this magazine called Underground. It was issue number 3, and it was subtitled the newsletter of the North American A.L.F. press office or something. It was essentially just an A.L.F. magazine. And I read this thing, and I remember, while they're talking, while the meeting's going on, I'm just sitting there like ignoring everything, just like reading this magazine. So in a weird way, I got introduced to the A.L.F. before I even really got introduced to actual, like what we think of as traditional activism. So it all kind of happened at the same time at the very best. So there's a whole lot that could be said about the next year or two, but that was how I got started.
Yeah, that's an incredible story, and it seems like you were just kind of into the you wanted to be effective right away. So can you talk about that process? Like, you said you were an ineffective vegan. What were you doing before, and then once you discovered all of this, how did that kind of change your way of activism?
I was doing nothing. So that first year I was a vegan, I was doing nothing. I was, I was listening to bands like Earth Crisis and these militant vegan bands that had like a militant message. And I was like, that's what I want to be doing. I want to be doing something. I don't want to be doing nothing. And so then when I got introduced to actual activism, like I said, everything was sort of parallel, right? So I got introduced to the direct action, A.L.F. side of things, and then the civil disobedience and just general protest, outreach side of things, all at the same time. And so I knew I had to do something because it was just killing me not doing anything. And so what I found was we would go, so immediately, like literally that weekend, we're out protesting. And I don't remember, I wish I could remember my first protest, but whatever it was something, it had an outreach element, but it was just us outside of a building waving signs, right? Maybe handing out literature. And I just, it's like, I think we all feel this way, right? It's just like, this is not happening fast enough. Like, animals are dying right now. They're dying within 1 or 2 miles of us somewhere. There's a lab or a farm or a slaughterhouse or something. And like, we're out here with a sign. This just does not feel like the tactics are commensurate with the severity of what's happening to animals. So I found myself just feeling very ineffective. Like, and that was a sentiment that was shared amongst just about everyone I was working with. Like, we're doing this because we have to do something, but we all agree it's not really that effective. Now, what is effective, just to be clear, I don't draw any kind of dichotomy between like outreach and like direct, like it's all, not only is it necessary, but I actually think outreach when it comes to veganism is probably like the most effective tactic when you talk just purely about saving animals. So this isn't like a hierarchy of tactics at all, but I just remember thinking like, we got to be doing more, like, or we should at least be supplementing our sign waving and our chanting with something at night that actually saves animals. So what I found was we weren't being effective in it as immediately as I wanted to, and so we began kind of surveying our options. And I had this A.L.F. newsletter that I'd just gotten, and I was like, that kind of planted the seed, like there's another way, right? It's not necessarily a different way or a way that's at odds with the way I've been doing things, but it's another way to supplement my activism. And so fortunately, this was a sentiment that, like I said, was shared amongst other people. And I, it was actually, I think, my second or third meeting of that group that I got involved with, the University of Washington. I think because I had that magazine, just like, I was like my best friend / surrogate child. Like, I just carried it around, like cradling it everywhere. And so I brought it to the next meeting, and I think an activist, someone there sensed that I had kind of a serious tone about me, we could say, and I was carrying this magazine. So he takes me aside after the meeting. He's like, "Hey, what do you think about the A.L.F.?" And he was very like, we were like, let's go for a walk. It was very like clear this was like a conversation that was privileged conversation. And I remember that moment so clearly because I grew up in California, and the A.L.F. had carried out some very high profile actions. And even if I don't remember exactly what they were, I remember sort of just knowing what the A.L.F. was. And I remember that, and then I remember, and it's weird to think about this now, but like an MTV like news special on the A.L.F. I've not been able to find this ever since, but I remember this is when I was like 13, I saw this. And so all these seeds have been planted, and I remember then I got the Underground newsletter, the Underground magazine, and I remember thinking, I hope someday the A.L.F. invites me to join them, right? Like that's what I've been thinking for years, even before I was vegan. And so this guy takes me on a walk, he's like, "What do you think about the A.L.F.?" And I was like, this is my moment. I was like, I'm getting invited in. And so And that's exactly what it was. And so he's like, well, I got an action plan and I want you to be involved with it. And I was like, yeah, all right, game on. So, sorry, I can go on forever, but what to put a bow on this long story, I thought I was showing up to raid a lab. Like, I thought the A.L.F. I didn't know the A.L.F. did a lot of small scale property damage. I thought the A.L.F. was just crowbars to doors, ferrying animals out the back, whisking them away in cargo trucks. And, that's what I thought the A.L.F. was. So I thought I was showing up I thought I was going to walk into his apartment and there was going to be like 10 other people with ski masks and we're all just going to go storm the University of Washington. And like literally that's not even like, that's literally what I thought was happening. And so I show up and it's just him and he's got like some paint in his bathroom and he's like putting paint into like Christmas like ornaments. And he explains to me that we're actually going to go paint bomb a taxidermy warehouse, which awesome. Not what I thought I was signing up for, but cool. And so that's what we did that night. We ended up paint bombing so that was my first like technically A.L.F. action, but not very effective or strategic. But it was that was my introduction to that actual side of activism.
Yeah, it seems like just from reading your book Liberate that you just have a different way of thinking than most people, I mean that in the best possible way. Like you seem like a person that just does things. Like you lived in an abandoned mansion rent free. You liberated thousands of animals. You were a fugitive for years. You served prison time. It seems like you just kind of like do whatever it takes. Can you just talk a little bit about that? And I don't know if that's kind of a way that you've always been, or if that was inspired by knowing what happens to animals. And I know you had a moment with Bill Nye that was crucial as well.
Yeah. So I think I've always been kind of an adventurer. Like fundamentally, that's kind of the thread that runs through everything, and not in a jovial or whimsical sense, but just sort of an action-based sense. Like I don't want to strategize. I want to get things done. So before we confuse people too much, you mentioned living in a mansion. I'll just kind of mention that's an example of sort of what kind of that mindset I'm talking about, of sort of action-based over critique-based. I knew a lot of people that were or still do, anti-rent, like, rent is theft or landlords are evil or whatever, right? And I was like, okay, cool, but what are you doing about it? So I went out and I found an abandoned mansion. I broke in. I lived there for almost 2 years. And lived rent-free. And so that's kind of an example where it's like you can sit all day and like critique, or you can take action. They don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive. So that story kind of ties into my activism in the sense that house provided the platform to me to be a full-time activist for the next couple years. Most people I know, it's like, oh, I can't go to the protest, I got a job, or I got to go to school, or this or that. And I said, how can we eliminate the middleman of jobs and work and everything, and just literally just distill down, what do I need to live? How can I get that out of the way and focus full-time on activism? So my form of that was, I'm just going to find an abandoned house and live in it. That seems like the best way to avoid having to work 9 to 5 is just have free rent, right? Because that's where most of your money goes. And so it's so awesome being 18 where like you don't know something can't be done, quote, so you just go and do it. Like I literally, the idea now of like, this was the second richest zip code in the state of Washington, by the way. Mercer Island it's like money. Like I didn't come from money. Like we lived in like an apartment but like it's money. So the idea there would be an abandoned mansion in the second richest zip code in the state of Washington is like completely insane if you thought about it logically, but I didn't know that it was insane. So I just did it. So that provided the kind of the launch pad, or the staging ground for me to be, for my activism for the next couple of years. So I live in this house rent free. I already forgot the question, man. I'm sorry. What are we talking about?
No, it's just about your mindset of just like kind of getting things done. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, I mean, activists, we always have to ask the question. It's like, okay, great. We can go ahead and line up our critique until we're out of breath. But like at the end of the day, like, what are we doing? And I always respect the people that focus on outcome versus process. And yeah, you need processes has a role, but focus on the product. So product over process. And at the end of the day, it's like, do you want to be on your deathbed thinking I had like the right opinions, or do you want to be the person that saved 100,000 animals? Right? I know which person I'd rather be. My opinions might be flawed oftentimes, but when it comes to my actions, I feel like I've been very aligned with, to the extent that I don't know. I mean, I think I can go to my deathbed knowing that that my actions in some instances, and hopefully a lot of instances, aligned with my ethics and my beliefs.
Powerfully spoken. Can you talk about, just for a minute, that little moment you had with Bill Nye? I just thought that was just kind of like a funny moment in your book, Liberate.
Yeah, Bill Nye. So this is just before Bill Nye got famous. My dad was a radio DJ in Seattle, so he knew all the, which you don't really think about, but it's sort of it's a form of show business in a sense. So he knew all the local talent, so to speak, the actors and the music. He just knew all those people. He would hang out with them. His girlfriend was the newscaster on a 6 o'clock news. So they all run in the same group, and so Bill Nye was just around. There was never, I didn't know him as celebrity guy. He's just, and he actually really wasn't a celebrity at that point, but he was just around. So one time we're all hanging out. It was me and my dad and his girlfriend, and he says, and they're all griping about their jobs, which Bill Nye was a comedian, newscaster, DJ, the cushest jobs on earth, right? They're all just rah, 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 jobs. And he looks at me, he's like, Peter, I want you to remember something. I'm going to tell you something. I want you to always remember this. He said, don't ever, ever get a job. He said, it's not worth it. And it just it's weird. I wasn't thinking this is Bill Nye coming at me. It was just some random dude my dad knows, but it stuck with me. And I've barely had a job my entire adult life. That's the net result of Bill Nye's wisdom. I've managed to avoid working basically my entire life because of what he imparted on me.
Yeah, I just thought that was so awesome. And he kind of denied that he said that later. He was like, that doesn't sound like me, when somebody came across
Yeah,
him.
my friend cornered him in an elevator, and he's like, I think I said control the means of production. I didn't say don't get a job. I just don't think he remembered.
I think maybe he had it right the first time.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us a little bit about being a liberator? You were kind of traveling across, I guess, the Midwest and liberating animals. Eventually got caught. Just tell us about all that and what was going through your head, and anything important you feel like you want to share just about that whole entire part of your life.
After about a year of the sign waving and that frustration I talked about earlier, we started to engage in a really prolific campaign of small-scale sabotage all around Seattle. And again, the idea was, I already talked about this, but the idea was we're just not doing enough. So we go out at night, and we would go to start at fast food places, butcher shops, the low-hanging fruit, kind of the downstream targets. And I realized, well, this isn't doing anything. We would go out and we'd smash out every window, we'd spray paint, and it was this isn't really doing much. And then something very weird happened about, a few months into this campaign. We were out every weekend. I mean, we were committing massive numbers of felonies, to put it bluntly. And then we went to a Honeybee Hams in Bellevue, Washington. It was just a deli like any other deli. We smashed out the windows and spray painted "Meat is Murder" and "Animal Killers" on the sidewalk. And for some reason, that particular action, of the dozens we carried out, was top story on the news that night, on every station. And it's weird to, people kind of forget, you were either on the news or you didn't exist. There was no internet, right? So it was just literally everyone in Seattle was seeing this. And what I remember about that most was that the camera panning in on our slogan that we spray painted, "Meat is Murder," on this, and "Animal Killers" on the sidewalk. And I was like, I've been protesting for a year. The media has now come within a light year of publishing anything we have to say, and here I am in 20 minutes breaking some windows. I got that message into the minds, in the living rooms and the minds of everyone in Seattle. Potentially 1 million plus people saw, for the first time possibly, connecting what they eat to the sentience of an animal. And I remember, so at that moment I was like, okay, we're kind of onto something here. Even though I didn't really feel effective to break windows, and I was realizing that, I realized there's another level to this where we can actually shortcut. And now there's the internet, so this is almost kind of an obsolete point. But back then it was if you got out of the media, you have a significant impact on culture in people's minds. So that was where I started to kind of give a media component to my actions, and I realized we could actually influence people. It was actually a form of outreach, is my point. It wasn't just sabotage; it was outreach as well. But so one of the next actions we carried out, where I started to actually just ask myself, okay, well, how can we actually save animals? Not just do damage, but save animals. So some friends and I got together. we went to a chicken slaughterhouse. It was right outside downtown Seattle. This actually closed recently. It's kind of insane to think this chicken slaughterhouse would exist like literally just outside of a downtown of a major metropolis. And we had no plan except to break into this building and destroy everything. That was the only plan. And we had there was I won't say how many people, but every one of us had like backpacks full of just every implement you could think of to do damage. It was like big sledgehammers, small sledgehammers, spray paint, acid, crowbar, like everything. And we just showed up ready to wreck the place. And we scaled up in the alley. We climbed up on the roof, walked across, got down in. We cut the lock to the actual killing room. And we got in there and we're like, I remember very clearly thinking, there's nothing to break here. Like it was like everything was big and metal and hard to damage, and we're like standing there with every piece of equipment known to man, and we can't find anything to break. So we ended up like breaking an office and doing some damage and like sabotaging a forklift and stuff. But anyway, we found 3 chickens on the killing floor that had been like escaped. Fortunately for them, we rounded them up and we put them in a cardboard box and we took them to safety and we gave them a home. And so that was my first actual live liberation. And so once you taste that, it's over. I mean, you're not going to go back at that point. So once you actually save an animal. So to get to your question, that was the next escalation of our tactics, and that proceeded to inspire way too many stories to tell. But fast forward to the part you mentioned where we planned a road trip across the U.S. We got very, very known in Seattle. We were literally in the newspaper as being named suspects in all these actions. It was the point where we just couldn't really function in that area without being suspected of whatever we did, the things we were doing, we were suspected of doing. So we decided to get out of the state. It was one friend and I. We bought a car. We had $60. We had a crowbar and we had bolt cutters, and that was it. We had no idea how we're going to refill our gas tank. We had the only plan was to hit as many fur farms as we could before pelting season. Pelting season is a time, usually in late November, when every animal on every fur farm in the country is killed. And so the plan here was, and there's so much to get into, but basically the model that we were copying, which we did not pioneer at all, was activists were starting to figure out that you could actually release mink and foxes from fur farms. And since they were actually native to North America, they would actually not just survive, but thrive in the wild. And so it provided this tremendous bang for your buck equation that we didn't have before, where we could go to a factory farm or something, we could take a few animals, but we had to find homes for them. It was this very laborious production. Whereas with the mink and with fur farms, you could just open the cages, release them in their natural habitat, and save thousands of animals in like 30 minutes. So this was the best bang for our buck. So we decided to, and we've been scoping out fur farms in Seattle, but we decided to really take the show on the road. And so we got that car, and we had a list of fur farms. There was a document called The Final Nail. You can still find it online. Document called The Final Nail that just listed how to raid fur farms and then where to do it, exactly what the addresses for fur farms were. And so we were like, all right, there are fur farms in Idaho, Montana, and we just traced a path. And so we got in a car and just started driving. And I mean, that whole trip is a whole conversation itself. But basically, by the end of it, we'd hit 6 farms. We'd released somewhere between 8,000 and 12,000 mink and 100 foxes. And at the end, we got caught. So, and that's a whole other story.
Yeah, I mean, you've got so many stories. I feel like we could just be here for hours and hours and hours, and there'd still be stories left over. And I want to hear all of them one day if I'm blessed enough. Like that. I don't know. It's just in your books. It's just incredible. It's incredible to hear about these things, especially in Liberate. That's more about your experiences. So can you talk a little bit about that strategy? Because I know as far as like going for the wild animals that can be reintroduced into their natural habitats, because I know there was some pushback even from within the animal rights movement. Like, are these animals going to survive in the wild? Are they going to cause an imbalance in nature? Are they going to get hit by cars, these types of things? I know they're all addressed in your book, but if you want to just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, the fundamental idea that sort of informed this tactic was that animals left in cages have a 100% chance of death, right? So that's guaranteed. There's no other outcome for them. But with that said, there were a lot of facts that I think the average person doesn't know about mink in particular, that I think kind of overcome those objections. And so one of them is mink are extremely territorial, so they can't stand to be within. I used to know these numbers off the top of my head, but like within 1 or 2 miles of another mink, they find it completely intolerant. So they fan out very quickly. They disperse very quickly. Even the media will report sometimes, the day after a raid, there's mink that are found 14 miles away. So they disperse very, very quickly. They are native North America. A lot of people don't even know that much. And they're only a handful of generations removed from their wild cousins. And you can actually look up, there's been several actually university-funded research studies about the survivability of ranch-raised mink, and they always come to the same conclusion, which is, there's one in particular that's kind of a landmark study in this, but it talked about how after, I don't know, it was like 6 months or something, not one mink had died due to lack of survival skills. Some did get hit by cars. Some were eaten by other predators. Like there was a natural, there were deaths that occurred, but none of them were due to lack of survival skills. So that was kind of the idea that we were informed of this going into this campaign, that this was, that mink not only tended to survive, but actually thrive in the wild.
Can you take a moment just to explain what it's like to liberate an animal, the feeling of opening up cages and seeing them disappear into nature, knowing that many of them will be saved from an absolutely brutal and horrible death, and that many of them will go on to produce offspring and continue out their natural lives. Can you just talk about what it feels like to be in that moment of opening up those cages?
The most memorable image I have in my mind is there's a farm called the Circle K farm in Sioux City, Iowa, which I think was the second farm that we hit. And it was also a fox farm. And it backs up to a natural park. And it's funny because that farmer claimed we released 5,000 mink. We counted 12,000. I don't know why he would downplay the number, because whoever's number is accurate. The point is, there's a lot of animals. And there's only 2 of us, so we spent like 5 hours. I mean, we were there from like 11 p.m. to like 4 a.m. All we were doing was opening cages. By the end of it, we come out the back that opens up to a natural park, and it kind of goes down a slope. And I just remember seeing the feel of this natural park just moving with mink. And it was the sunlight, or the moonlight rather, and I just remember that was one of the most high impact moments of my life. So I think one of the things people would be surprised to hear about a situation like that, or where you're in this moment where really high risk, really like there's nothing on earth you'd rather be doing, but there's nothing scary at the same time, is the complete absence of fear that you feel in that moment. That's not to say that's not a statement of bravado at all. What I mean by that is you have lots of fear going right up to the moment where you're starting to save animals, and as soon as you open that first cage, or that crowbar hits the door, or whatever you're doing, it's just pure presence. It's just game on. And so I guess the reason I mention that is, although I'm certainly not here to encourage illegal activity, but anyone who's hesitant about like, I don't know if I have the guts for that. Like, you've got the guts once you're at the point of no return. Like, once you open that first cage, once that crowbar hits the door, it's all presence, and you're just going. And so it's a feeling of total congruency between thought and action that's very rare in life. Very, very rare. You might have that experience a handful of times. I don't know, I'm not married, but like asking your wife to marry, like there's a few moments in life where like you're totally congruent, and that's one of them. That's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. In another book, Until All Are Free, the story of the Swedish Animal Liberation Front, there's just some incredibly beautiful images in there, both written images and also photographs of this kind of thing. And I don't know, just the feeling I get from looking at these photographs and reading these stories. I mean, it's no matter what you think about the law and things like that, it's undeniable that these animals are appreciate that. So, what was it like? You were a fugitive for several years, under false names, living kind of a bizarre type of life, and you weren't even able to reveal your real name to people you were closest to. You weren't able to, contact your loved ones. Can you just talk about that period of your life? Like how did you end up in that situation, and how were you just kind of handling that day to day?
Once we got indicted, we were facing a maximum of 82 years in prison, and realistically, that was never actually realistic of a sentence, but I didn't know that at the time. More realistic would have been like 12 to 15 years. I think it's probably according to sentence. But anyway, the point is a lot of time, and so I was, in my 20s, and I had a life to live, and I just decided to go on the run. So I immediately I bought every book I could on, this is not exactly before the internet, but before there was much on the internet. I went out and got every book I could on how to obtain a new ID using fake documents. And so I obtained an ID under a fake name. So I was essentially reborn at that point. So I spent the next 7.5, 8 years living under an assumed name. And it was kind of the two extremes. So yes, you're correct that none of the people that I was around on a day-by-day basis knew who I was. I had girlfriends that didn't know who I was. I mean, I had like close relationships with people who had no idea who I was. I would go on tour with bands, like nobody knew who I was. And so I would spend being really, like, I had room, very close contact with lots and lots of people, and I had to maintain this false identity for all those years. And then, but the other side of that, which is kind of interesting, is that I was also, because I still had activist friends, in like sort of the above ground, so to speak, who I would resurface and interact with them periodically. I couldn't call them up and be like, hey, what's up, man? It's Peter. I'm coming over. I couldn't do that, but I could sort of pop up at their work, or we would have ways to communicate that were sort of off the radar. And so they would then introduce me, since they knew that my situation was very perilous and I could only be in contact with other activists that they were very, very trusted. They would introduce me to the most trusted people in their network. And then those most trusted people introduced me to the most trusted people in their network. So it was kind of awesome in the sense it was the two extremes where people had no idea who I was, but then really, really solid people who were like vetted over years, who did know who I was, who I was able to trust with my secret, who could have just called and got the $100,000 reward. I mean, I had a $100,000 price tag on my head. And so it was the two extremes, like the most solid activists ever, and then people that weren't activists at all because I couldn't be around activists because there was a threat of me running into someone from my past, or someone, I had a wanted poster, like, when they used to put those in post out, like people would recognize me, and so I had to avoid that. So it was this weird dance I had to do, moving between two extreme worlds for, about 8 years. And I lived, that is truly another book.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I'll read it when it comes out. In Liberate, I think you said you served around 12 hours of prison time per animal you liberated after you were caught. That really puts things into perspective, and I sat and thought about that for a little while after I read it. And even once captured and sentenced and you were in jail, you still felt like that was all worth it.
No question. It's funny. I actually had a journalist call me out on that recently because she's like, hold on a second. I'm doing the math here. I sent her the police reports for everything. She's like, I'm doing the math. And it was actually like, I forget if it was significantly less or significantly more, but it was like either like 20 hours per mink or 4 hours. I forget what it was, but it was like something. So anyway, that 12-hour number is apparently I did not do the math correctly. But whatever it is, the point still holds, which is that every day I could just tick off like that's at least one or two saved animals, and it really does put things in perspective because it's like one of the things I always say, and I'm not new in expressing this sentiment, is that if you're gonna go to prison, you want it to be for something that actually got results. You don't want to go to prison for something symbolic. You want to go to prison thinking I have the life of at least one saved animal to my credit, and that makes the time. Doesn't make it easy, but it makes it worth it and makes you at least go through that time with a sense of peace. And so that was the kind of peace that I had, where I knew every single day that I went to sleep, I was like, there's a couple mink out there that are free because I'm here, and that did make it worth it.
You talked about in Liberate, you talked about being in prison and meeting people who also risked it all, but for material possessions and money, and basically selfish wants. And you were kind of talking about how you wish the animal rights movement felt that strongly about animals, as strongly as they did about selfish wants, basically. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yes, that was one of the most difficult things to deal with going to prison. I shouldn't say one of the most, but a difficult thing that I learned is I was around a lot of people that risked more for money than even I had or anyone I knew had for animals. And I would, I mean, there was a guy in there who like would literally break into banks. Like I didn't even know that was a thing. Like apparently, like you could, but he would like not rob banks, like break in through like the skylight. And he had all these stories. And I was like, this guy has spent more time researching how to get into banks than frankly I have or anyone I know has on getting into a lab, let's just say. And I was like, what does this say about us that we're getting basically shown up by people whose motivation is just purely money? And they're willing to go not just further, they're willing to spend, like this guy had a lab, like he would like practice, like bypassing alarms and stuff in his garage. Like this is kind of stuff that like, activists don't do, and we should, because man, I mean, it was really discouraging in that sense. Another thing that I thought was interesting about the culture of prison was that in prison, it doesn't matter what you say. Like there's no such thing as talking about something. And you're either doing it or you're not talking, but there's no in between. So an example of this is you're either someone's best friend or you're stabbing them in the throat. Like there is no such thing as talking trash in prison. Like it just does not happen. It cannot happen. And it's a total congruency, kind of like I talked about, like between like your actions and like you're either just doing it or you're shutting up about it. And activists unfortunately have this is kind of challenging for people. Activists love the imagery of taking action, and they love, wearing an A.L.F t-shirt. And at the end of the day, there's very few people that actually step up and take action. And so I think what I kind of learned was, and I've always kind of felt this, but I think it's important to like delegitimize opinions as activists. Like if you're going to have an opinion, you should be obligated to declare what you're doing in furtherance of that opinion, like what action you're taking in furtherance of that. Does not mean, right? This does not mean if you're not breaking into labs, you're a poser, right? That's like totally not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is opinions very often become a substitute for the action. Like they provide a subconscious sense of satisfaction. And I think, it's kind of like they say, I forget where I picked this up, but like the more you talk about something, the further away you get from doing something about it. And so to tie back to prison, that was something I picked up in prison, was people were willing to go to just extreme lengths and exercise extreme ingenuity to get their hands on a little bit of money, and way more so than me and my friends had for animals. So that was one part of prison. The prison, that's a whole other book actually. I mean, the prison experience was obviously challenging. The one thing I always say is the parts about prison you think are going to be hard aren't, but the parts that are hard are things you never would have thought of. So specifically what that means is I thought going into prison was just like this Darwinian gladiator hellscape where you just roll in and you're just like in a fight to survive every day, right? It's totally not like that. There are prisons like that. That was not my prison. I don't think that's how most prisons are. It was not survival of the fittest. It was more like survival of the best social skills, which I didn't excel at either. So I was kind of screwed in both ways, but I could fake it long enough to like get through the experience. So what I found was that, the same things that help you outside in the real world, like they help you in prison, but the stakes are just a lot higher. So in other words, you just gotta be a decent person. You just gotta be like pleasant, decent person. Confidence goes a long way, but not necessarily like machismo confidence, but just sort of willing to hold your ground confidence. People respect that in prison. So I was able to kind of navigate things and I never got into a fight. I was able to get through the experience and and not have too much turbulence other than just kind of riding it out. I mean, it was miserable, and it was very difficult, and it was a lot of challenges, and a lot of really serious stuff happened, but none of it was of the life or death variety.
For people who feel, and you know, in both the new book, the A.L.F. Strikes Back, and Liberate, you talk a little bit about these kinds of things, and you know, other people talk about these kinds of things in the new book, but and I feel like there's mixed opinions on this, but I wanted to get your take. For people who feel they're definitely not ever going to do A.L.F. style actions, whether it be they're just not willing to take the risk, or they can't for some other reason, or don't want to for some other reason, are there any legitimate ways to support the A.L.F. from above ground, or just any other effective and worthwhile kinds of activism that you would particularly recommend?
Absolutely. And I hope, even though we're kind of focusing on the A.L.F. stuff, because that's kind of what my two books are about, or the books we're talking about are about, I don't mean this to come off as, like I mentioned before, like a hierarchy of tactics. It's not that at all. So the first thing I would say, if you really just do want to support the A.L.F., but you just not want to participate, you know, if anyone ever comes to you and asks you to like rent a car, or even better, give a home for an animal, or support in some way that doesn't actually put you at the scene of the crime, that's the best way. The two biggest challenges, the two biggest obstacles to A.L.F. activity are finding good people to work with, number one, and then number two, finding homes for animals. Which a lot of actions do. You know, you're liberating domesticated animals, so it's very challenging. So obviously, if you're not willing to participate, the other one would be giving an animal a home, or being willing to do the networking required that the A.L.F. oftentimes really, they're too legally compromised to be able to do themselves. Do that networking to find homes for animals. If anyone approaches you, you're not likely in your life to ever be approached, but if you are, that would be the best way. The other way, I mean, listen, it's not really about supporting the A.L.F. It's just, we're all just here to save animals. So it's not about supporting anyone within the movement. It's about, serving the animals. So help animals. Like, I can promise you, anyone who does A.L.F. activity is thrilled if you help an animal in any way. And whether or not it's legal is an irrelevant detail. So, but yeah, renting the cars and providing some kind of support, like logistical or networking support, is huge for the people who have their boots on the ground in that realm.
I wanted to get your take too. You made a post about this a while back, but I wanted to get maybe a little more in depth about what you think about this. What do you think about the anti-fur campaigns that have been going on for the last year with a lot of these larger stores, you know, banning fur?
I'm glad you mentioned that. I was literally, as I ended my last answer, I was like, oh, I should have mentioned CAFT, because they're just killing it right now in the best way possible. So yeah, so you're referring to the work of a lot of people, but in particular, Coalition to Abolish the Fur Trade, who's just on a rampage right now, and it's fantastic to see. And they're actually doing what we thought we were doing in the 90s, not in the direct action side of things, but just on the legal campaign side of things, but weren't very effective at. So they've taken that blueprint, or I really just invented their own blueprint, and are just so what you're referring to is just, as of the time we're recording this, I don't even know, like 8 different designers and retailers I can't even have dropped fur, and it's the fur industry is reeling over this. I'm trying to think what to say here, but I'm able to, through very roundabout ways, some things land in my inbox sometimes that I do not solicit, but some of these are, sometimes these fur industry, like internal fur industry bulletins will kind of land in my inbox, and I can tell you they are freaked out. So it's amazing. So yeah, so what I meant to say in my last answer was, if you want to get involved in a way that's not the A.L.F., maybe the most bang for your buck right now would be to throw your weight behind CAFT. And maybe next year it'll be a different group, I don't know. But as of the time we're speaking right now, Coalition to Abolish the Fur Trade is really, having just a massive impact in a way that I can't say I've ever really seen over a couple decades. So get involved, look them up, get involved in any way you can with them. That would be my first suggestion. Oh, but anyway, what do I think about it? Yeah, of course, obviously. No, they suck. Yeah, that's awesome. And to speak to the fur industry more specifically, I was recently in Wisconsin, which historically has always had the largest number of fur farms. And I decided, for old time's sake, I had no illegal intent for the federal agents who may be listening to this. I was just driving around the countryside, and I decided to check out some old fur farms, including some ones that I had visited back in the day. And I think I went to, I don't know, it was like 10, and I only found 3 that were open, that were still open. So it's a small data set. I don't know if that's reflective of the overall industry, but I know that I have seen figures from within the industry that suggest that over 50% of the farms have shut down in the last few years. So and this is largely a story that's not being told. I mean, this is an insane amount of collapse on the supply side of the fur industry right now. And so to hit them on the consumer side at the same time it feels like this is the death blow.
Yeah, I'm hoping so. I mean, I've only been involved in activism for about 5 years, just animal activism in general. And I've never seen anything like it for what that's worth. You've been in the movement for a lot longer than that. And I've heard, I mean, I was a kid in the 90s, but I've heard that, it was the fur industry was almost gone in the 90s. And I guess people just kind of assumed that it was going to fall by the wayside and kind of took a little bit of the pressure off. So I guess hopefully, we can just keep the pressure on, keep the pedal to the metal until, it's virtually done this time.
That was really the sentiment. There was the above ground, like the PETA level campaigning. I may have my years wrong, but I remember kind of feeling like it had sort of waned by like around the time I got involved. And then the direct action side of things picked up. And there was a few years there where, man, it felt like there's no other outcome but victory. I mean, like, fur farms were getting hit so often at such a rapid pace. I mean, we went without revealing names or details or addresses. We went and hit a farm. It was the first farm I ever raided, and I remember we got the newspaper the next day, and we were reading about, and it said X number of animals liberated in this general area. And we all looked at each other. We're like, I think we liberated about half that many. So this must not be us. There's been someone else out that same night in the same area. And that didn't seem at all weird to us that there would be other people out raiding farms. It turns out it actually was us. We just like miscounted or they missed. But the point of this story is that our farms were getting hit so often at such a rapid pace that it didn't seem weird at all. There'd be 2 groups of people out raiding farms in the same area on the same night. And that momentum unfortunately waned. It picked up again in like the mid, maybe like 6 years ago or so, but it's unfortunately at an all-time low right now. But then again, CAFT is picking up the slack there. So yeah.
Can you talk? I know there's a ton to say, and it gets covered in your books, but can you talk a little bit about the importance of security culture and just not talking to police and things like that? I know you were a victim of someone opening up their mouth. Can you just talk a little bit about the importance of all of that for people who it might not be on their radar?
It's very interesting how little I think. My sense is this is not talked about as much anymore. I remember when I got involved, it was indoctrinated into you from virtually day one. And I don't even just mean illegal stuff. I just mean all activism, that like you would practice what's known as security culture. Security culture being defined as controlling the flow of information to prevent it from getting to people who will put you in prison or legally compromise you in some way. So not telling anyone anything they don't absolutely have to know if it's of an illegal nature. Keeping communications off of phones, not speaking about anything illegal in cars. But it also it's not just about illegal activity necessarily, but that's where the stakes are highest. But it's not about not gossiping, not speculating about, something happened. I wonder if it was this person, I wonder if it was that person. Like, that's all bad security culture. And so I learned this very early on. There was I kind of referenced this earlier, but there was a fur auction house outside Seattle, a big convergence every year. People would come from out of state. And we went to the hotel while the furriers were staying. And a friend and I went, and we didn't know what to do. We went in the lobby of the Embassy Suites, and we had like a can of spray paint. And we're like, I don't know, let's just start spray painting stuff. So we just start spray painting the wall of the, like, in the lobby of the hotel, like, for his murder. It was kind of a part that, like, wasn't in view of the desk, but it was still like, and so we just went out and joined the protest. And we told the group, the organizer of the demo, we're like, oh, hey, we just did this thing. And I still remember her face. She's like, don't ever, ever tell anyone anything you've ever done illegal. I didn't hear that. I don't ever want to know about this again. If you ever do that again, like, you're not welcome to any more protests. And I was like, oh, I thought I did something cool. Like, I didn't know. But she scolded the hell out of us. So I always remember that, and I'm grateful for her to that, because that taught me an important lesson. You don't ever talk about things you've done, ever. And so it's extremely important. The stakes can be really, really high. I did get, I had my co-defendant in that road trip I mentioned, that I released Mink with, in Fox's. He ended up breaking under a very light amount of pressure. So security culture also carries over into the courtroom, into police interrogations. Just the fundamental idea that, like, literally nothing you can say will ever help you. Like, cops are only there to put you in prison. People think you can talk your way out of a situation. Like, you can't. Nothing good will ever come out of giving any statement to a police ever. Another example that seems benign, but I had my house raided by the FBI twice in a 3-month period. This is some years ago. It's like 2010 or so. But my roommates, who weren't as versed in security culture, were like making small talk with the FBI. And while they're searching our house, the guy whose job it was to, like, keep us cornered and not go anywhere, he was like, my friend was like showing him magic tricks, and I was like, dude, you don't talk, like, you don't engage in small talk with cops. Like, they're trained to small talk and sort of engender themselves doing, like, illicit information that seems benign at the time. Then you realize you just got duped into giving up information you weren't supposed to give. So, like, even just not even making small talk with cops, don't get cozy with police in any context. It just never helps. It only hurts. By the way, speaking of bad security culture, so my co-defendant did end up snitching on me, and another thing I would mention is just don't ever. It's a very cynical take on things, but, like, you don't ever, like, assume that everyone will break. Like, don't ever assume someone won't break. I mean, I remember my co-defendant. When I was a fugitive, I went and saw someone set me up with an activist attorney, like, to have a conversation, because I was curious about. I never actually consulted an attorney. I've been on the run for like a year. I never actually talked to a lawyer. So someone set up a meeting with an activist attorney, and over the course of this conversation, he's telling me, well, here's what the sentencing guidelines are. Here's what you should know. Da da da. And he's like, now we have to talk about what's going to happen if your co-defendant testifies against you. And I remember just going, nope, won't happen. Change subject. Cut the conversation short. I was like, nope, not going to happen. We don't need to talk about that. And he's like, well, like, historically, like, most people do break under pressure. I was like, he won't. Will never happen. 0% chance. And he's like, yeah, I just want you to be realistic. He could. And I was like, nope. And I was so naive. I really thought that because we all took the oath of don't ever talk to cops, that everyone would follow it. And that's just not the case. So don't ever assume that your best friend won't break.
Yeah. Well, in the new book, I want to know, like, what is, because the new book, the A.L.F. Strikes Back, it just came out recently. It's divided up into different sections. It's got some interviews. It's got history. It's got how-tos. It's got copies of manuals from back in the 90s that I just had a blast reading. Can you talk about maybe one or two of your favorite liberation stories from the book?
Absolutely. My favorite was there's a section. So there's 5 sections. There's how it was done articles, where the A.L.F. actually describes after the fact how they carried out actions. There's essays by A.L.F. members. There's communiques. There's how-to guides, and then interviews. So in the how it was done section, is that what it is? I've got it right here. I got to look at the how it was done section. There was an article written by a very detailed piece written by activists who carried out the largest break-in at a laboratory in U.S. history. At the University of Arizona in 1989, they rescued 1,200 animals. They set fires in 2 different buildings. They broke into multiple buildings. It was a very elaborate action. And that was first published in an early issue of that magazine Underground that I referenced earlier. There was a A.L.F. magazine in the 90s, and it's definitely the most detailed how it was done, like glimpse into the mechanics and logistics of an A.L.F action I think that's ever been written, at least in the U.S. That's by far my favorite. It's very detailed. And if you really want to understand, like start to finish, how the A.L.F carries out a really high-profile action, that would be it. That would be the one to start with. And it's just like I'm just as someone who's been in, someone who's spent a lot of time scheming about how to get inside labs and stuff. Like what's really remarkable is just and this really sounds very strange, but like the craftsmanship that goes into these. I mean, you read like. At once they're extremely elaborate. At the other hand, I think they're way more simple than people think. These actions are way more simple than people think they are. So anyway, you want to get a glimpse into how people break into labs. That would be the one to start with. That's in the first section. Another one that kind of was just more personal to me is having spent a lot of time trying to find farms to raid, to put it bluntly. There's a point in the final nail, which is a document, a list of fur farm addresses. There's a point where you start to run out of farms. Like either this farm's been hit a bunch, or the security is pretty high, or the farmer's house is close to the sheds at this one. You start to kind of be like, ugh, or we can't find this one, and you start to run out of farms. So there's a how it was done piece in the book that was written by activists who had the same problem that we had, where they ran out of fur farm addresses, and so they decided they had to go to the source of fur farm addresses, which was a fur feed supplier. So they actually staged a raid of a fur feed supplier, not to save animals, not to burn it down, but actually to steal their paperwork so they can get addresses for unknown farms, which they did. And that was just like, I was just salivating when I first read that, because I was like, God, that's genius. That particular raid. It's not really known what was done with those addresses, but it seems to be the case that those addresses somehow trickled their way through different activists and ended up being publicized. And many of those farms were actually subsequently raided that were never known prior to that paperwork being stolen from that. So that was just kind of a personal one, because I really see the value in that action. I thought it was really creative and really impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the stories, I think it's the very first one about how those two guys saved a dolphin. I mean, there's some intense logistics to something like that. Just their determination to get it done is incredible. And yeah, sometimes it takes, I feel like from what I've read to execute one of these actions, a lot of times it takes, creativity and ingenuity and drive. But yeah, for this one in particular, and thinking outside the box, like what you said, let's find the the addresses. Like that's the only way that other liberations are going to be able to be carried out. But with this dolphin story, I mean, just with minks, I mean, not to say it's necessarily I'm not to make light of liberating minks, but I mean, like liberating a dolphin, like, I don't know, man, like the logistics seem just insane. I wouldn't even know where to start if it were me.
Yeah, liberating mink is very much unskilled labor compared to liberating a dolphin. So what they did was they strapped these dolphins to I guess it was like a flatbed trailer and like drove them to the ocean. This is the first recorded animal liberation in U.S. history. Amazing. Yeah, amazing story. Incredible story. But the other thing, just one of my concerns with putting out this book is, you're publishing like the best, most sensational stuff, right? And one of the concerns I had was people coming away from this book thinking that you had to be some kind of ninja, right, to pull this stuff off. And so what I would counter with when people read stories like that and go, well, I don't know how to I can't lift a dolphin, like, or whatever. Like, one of the things I would counter with is, and this is actually I'm going to quote myself here, but from Liberate, which is, when you have a strong enough why, the how will always take care of itself. So, it's a combination of, we all have the why, right? We all want to save animals, but it's also a combination of like, putting yourself in that situation where an opportunity can present itself, combined with a strong why, and stuff happens, man. It's borderline cosmic. The number of times I've gotten out of the mindset, gotten out of my head and just said, you know what? Okay, sure, this place might be perceived as being a fortress, but I'm just going to go there and find out for myself. I'm going to go, and then you see it, you're like, oh, wait a minute. There's like a power meter I can kind of pull myself up on, and then there's like that second floor window that's cracked, and all this stuff just like starts to happen. It's insane. And so what I tell people is, no matter how daunting you think a particular target is, just go put yourself there, just with like a blank mind. And I mean, it's like the vegan gods, man. They start to emerge and they start to show themselves. And it's like all of a sudden, just opportunities present themselves that just you wouldn't even believe. So there's a story I also mentioned in Liberate. I think it's worth telling. That I had my house was I referenced this a second, but my house was searched. This is going back a lot of years, but they had obtained a search warrant for my house. I was living in Utah briefly, and they obtained a search warrant for my house, thinking that I had some involvement with the break-in of a laboratory that happened in Iowa some years before. And their evidence was just like, it was just so ridiculous. But anyway, they somehow were able to get a search warrant. They searched my house. And so after the search happened, my roommate and I were driving around. And this is another story I tell in the book where he was like, we're looking at the search warrant. And it's like, we have evidence to blah, 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 raid of a lab in Iowa, 400 animals liberated. They're breaking down what they thought linked me to that, which is like completely just ridiculously tenuous. And so, but we knew for the first time reading this document, because the FBI just like basically throws this warrant at you on their way out. They just go here and they just like toss the papers. So we're driving around reading this document and we're like, oh, this is about that thing in Iowa that A.L.F raided back in 2004. And so my roommate said, he's like, yeah, that's crazy that people were able to break into this lab in 2004 and rescue 400 animals and not get caught. And he's like, it's crazy because it's like, we all know like labs are impenetrable now. It must have been an inside job because nobody can get into labs anymore. And that sentiment always really bothers me when people say something can't be done, right? It's like, if you know something can't be done, like, okay, like there's a very limited situation in life where you know something can't be done, but like that's not one of them. Like there's most of the things we think can't be done, it's an emotional calculation, not like an actual logical one. So I said to my friend, I said, okay, well, let's explore this. Like, why do you think labs can't be broken into? And he's like, come on, man. Everyone knows that. After the 80s, when a bunch of labs got broken into, they all increased their security, and now it's impossible. And I said, okay, but let's stay with me here. Like, what evidence do you have for this belief? Like, it makes sense what you're saying, but what evidence do you have? And he's like, oh, come on, man. Everyone knows. And he just kept circling back to everyone knows. This is just everyone. And when I realized he was just reciting this dominant belief that actually had not been tested at all. Now, guess who did test that belief? Those activists in Iowa in 2004 who found it to be completely false and rescued 400 animals and did $500,000 in damage, right? So I thought that was a kind of interesting sort of mini case study in like how many beliefs we walk around with as activists about what is or is not possible that really have no evidentiary basis at all.
Yeah, and I wonder who perpetuates beliefs like that. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Well, I'll tell you, it's two people. So yeah, I think you're probably alluding to the government or the industry, but I also think it's perpetuated largely. I mean, I'm as conspiratorial as anyone, but I think it's actually really activists that want to feel like to reduce their sense of obligation. Because if you feel like something's impossible, you don't have any obligation to actually do it, right? So I really think it's mostly activists who and we're all guilty of this to some extent, right? But activists who consciously or subconsciously want to alleviate themselves of the guilt of not doing anything.
You talk in Liberate about what you call the cop inside your head, and that kind of goes with what I think you're talking about right now. I mean, I think, yeah, we also perpetuate these ideas amongst ourselves. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by the cop inside your head?
Yeah, the cop in your head is that voice telling you that if you do X, Y, Z, you're going to go to prison, or that they're always watching you, or any belief that is probably just made up, or a limiting belief, like I referenced earlier, that would also serve the interests of animal abusers or the police or the government or whatever. In other words, if you had a cop in your head, you literally had a cop whispering in your ear, I don't think they could do as good of a job as activists do to ourselves, with telling ourselves all these scripts that run through our heads about what, like I said, like what is or isn't possible. Like this idea that like, well, I don't want to break the law because I don't want to go to prison. Like, that's a very cop-based belief. Like, that's what they want you to think. They want you to think that there's a direct one-to-one relationship between breaking laws and going to prison. When the fact is very few people get caught. The fact is you can mitigate those risks tremendously. I'm saying this as someone who's been caught. Like, I was really stupid. Like I made really easily avoidable mistakes. Like I could have limited my risk to a single digit percentage for sure. If I had, chance of getting caught, if I had just carried out basic security protocols. So the cop in our head is something most of us don't question it because we just sort of think we're reciting absolute truths when actually we're reciting false beliefs. So I guess the takeaway here is anytime you want to do something, but you got the voice telling you it can't be done, maybe ask yourself, like, where did that belief come from? Was that planted there? Or do I actually have evidence for that belief?
Absolutely. All right. So if you were in a room full of just brand new activists right now, like people who just went vegan and decided they want to get active, or people who maybe aren't even vegan yet and, decide they want to do something for the animals. If you were in a room full of people like that, what advice would you give them?
Gosh, I always am suspicious of any answer that's supposed to be applied to everyone because there's so many factors, right? And that's the sexy answer everyone wants, but I don't know if that exists. And so, this is where we start to get into the realm of like reciting really like trite cliches here, but I have to do it. It's like, leverage your strengths, like figure out what you're really good at, blah, 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 right? We all hear this stuff, right? But like seriously, like, in my particular, so we'll just speak to a general audience. So figure out what you're good at. Find your people. Find the people that you'll just know. I'm trying to put it to words, but like you'll just know. Like one of my biggest regrets is not recognizing how rare it was to have a solid group of like 7 people, all of whom were willing to do the exact same thing. And again, we're not even talking about illegal stuff. That was the case in my situation, but could be willing on the same page, doing the exact thing, willing to make sacrifices, willing to live in poverty. Like everything was aligned, right? And in my mind, I'm like, cool, we're all going to go to the grave like this. And that's just not how it works. People go different directions. People get weird. They join cults. Like lots of weird stuff happens, right? So when you have those people, every day should be maximized for impact, because I promise you think you're going to be that group, whatever it is. It could be 2. It could be one best friend. It could be you're in Berkeley and you're in direct action everywhere and you've got 300 people, whatever it is, right? You think that's just forever, and it's not. Believe me, it's not. So every day should be like, how can I maximize this group of people I have with me right now for impact? Because I tell you, there was a lot of things where we sat back and were like, oh, we'll do that next year. Or you don't know if there's going to be next year. You don't know if there's going to be next month. You don't know if someone's going to meet a girl and get married and drive. All sorts of life changes happen where people just suddenly are no longer aligned. And just make every single day count, because you're not going to find very many of those people in your life. So that's one thing. But generally just start making waves, just make noise. Like make waves, and whatever that means to you, just start making waves. It could be illegal stuff. You could be a genius at lobbying. I don't know, but just start making waves. People are way too concerned about appearances, and you just have to get outside your comfort zone, and just make as much noise as possible. And you never know the impact of that. You throw the pebble in the whatever the Buddhist myth thing is. You throw the pebble in the lake, and the ripples. You don't know where it's going to go. But you have to make those waves, right? And one of them is going to possibly be the big domino that starts knocking over other dominoes, and pretty soon you've got some major victories to your credit.
Absolutely. Man, I feel like not only could I talk to you for hours, but somebody just needs to make an entire documentary or movie about you. I don't know, but I appreciate you being here on the podcast. Is there anything else that you just want to share before we wrap it up?
Well, first, I just want to thank you for being such a force. I do almost nothing on social media, but you are inescapable. So I know you're out there doing awesome stuff. So thank you for your work. The books we referenced, one's called Liberate, one's called the A.L.F. Strikes Again. You can get those Amazon, get them anywhere. And then, I guess I would tell people, just don't stop caring. To the new generation of activists, I would say just conformity has become almost a religion, and you've got to be willing to make enemies, right? be willing to make enemies even with other activists for the sake of animals. That's a big message. That could be taken many different directions, but that's one of my 1,000 party messages. If I had to give one, that's what I'd start with.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Peter. We'll put all of the information about how to get your books in the description. Really appreciate you being here. You're like a personal hero of mine. It's just been great to talk with you and meet you, and I appreciate it. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
Thanks, man.
I am so thankful to Peter for sitting down with me and having this discussion. He is just an incredible human being, someone I look up to a lot, and the opportunity to sit down with him and pick his brain a little bit was very special. If you want to buy his book, The A.L.F. Strikes Again, or his book, Liberate, you can find the information in the description. Again, I promise you, Liberate is a page turner, and the A.L.F. Strikes Again is the stories in there are so captivating. I hope that you'll check those books out. You will not regret it. Thanks again so much, everybody, for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast today, please rate and review it. It really helps others find it more easily, and the more people that find it, the more people can be inspired by the guests interviewed on our show, and we can turn that into actionable change for the animals. Also, if you like what we do here at the podcast and what we do at Animal Activism Mentorship, providing support and guidance for activists who are new and wanting to learn, if you want to help support our work, you can do so on Patreon, at Animal Activism Mentorship on Patreon. It really goes a long way in helping us. AAM, everything we provide is always free. So for those that can afford to financially support us, it really goes a long way. We appreciate it so much. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Animal Activism Mentorship, where you can keep up with the podcast as well as everything AAM. One more reminder that you can sign up for a free mentor to help you with your activism at animalactivismmentorship.com. If you needed a sign that you should be an activist for animals, this is it. Remember that it will take all of us to achieve animal liberation. Stay focused, stay positive, be effective, and keep doing your part. Until next time.